Today's topic is attack surface management. I'm Steve Ross. Joining me will be Catherine Kearns and Katie Enns, two members of our team. Catherine and Katie, would you mind introducing yourselves to our audience?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Kearns. I'm head of proactive cyber services at SRM. I work with organizations who are looking to improve their cyber resilience. Some are those who have been through an incident and have had a startling reminder of how important it is to close exploitable vulnerabilities. And some are those who are proactively looking to identify and reduce their cyber risk exposure. Nice to be here. Sure.
Thank you, Catherine. All right, we'll throw it over to you, Katie.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Katie Enns. I have been in cyber now for about 8 years, and 4 of those years, coming up to 5 actually, have been spent doing attack surface management. So I've kind of seen the industry shift over the last 5 years, and approaches to, say, vulnerability management have now changed to become more focused on attack surface management. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in the session.
Awesome, great. And I know we'll have some good polling, so we'll get to that in just one second here. I'm Stephen Ross. As I mentioned at the top, I am the head of business development and a director here in our cybersecurity practice in the US. Like Katie and Catherine, I have over a decade of cyber experience as well, and I'll be moderating this discussion. So before we get to the poll, go through our agenda really quickly here. We'll be doing, we just did our introduction to our speakers. We're going to do an overview of what we mean by attack surface management, talk to you a little bit about what those types of tools and platforms are capable of. We'll have a little bit of a back and forth discussion with Katie and Catherine, asking some questions. We'll encourage you all to, after that, submit questions that we'll answer during the webinar. So I think from there, we should be good to dive into a poll, and then I'll introduce SRM and our topic in a little bit more depth. Okay, so your first poll here, we'll do one at the start and we'll do one to finish. Responses are anonymous, so don't worry about what you put in here. Let's see how the numbers are coming out. Looking like most of the folks attending are keen to understand more and new to ASM, so that'll be right in our wheelhouse. Perfect. So many of you will know who we are, but for those who do not, SRM is a global cybersecurity and corporate intelligence consultancy. We can go ahead to, I think, the next slide here, Katie. Perfect. Awesome. So we were founded in 2005. We got our start doing operational security in the wake of the Iraq-Afghanistan wars. Our organization did tremendous work for our clients, built a lot of trust, and from there we expanded over into cybersecurity and incident response, where you see us thriving today. So as of today, we've got 9 global offices. We can chase the sun and offer 24/7 incident response services, covering 45 languages. We're almost 400 strong as far as our head count. So that gives an understanding of the type of work that we do and the market share we have. I think that's important. Last year, we believe the Director of National Intelligence numbers reported about 5,400 to 5,500 incidents across the globe. SRM responded to over 600 of those. So again, really demonstrating our expertise here. Awesome. Okay, let's move to the next slide. All right, so attack surface management, right? Let's get into the heart of this issue here. Everything, everywhere, all at once. Katie, can you introduce attack surface management to us? Tell us what it is, what it means, maybe some of the core principles.
Yeah, absolutely. So attack surface management as a practice, it aims to help organizations identify what their attack surface looks like. So what systems, what applications they have, where they're located, but also the risk associated to those systems and applications as well. One of the key things about attack surface management is that it's a continuous process. So historically, organizations might have carried out a point in time pen test, but actually at the point of that pen test being complete, those results could be considered quite out of date. So if, like a new vulnerability were to be released the following week, or the attack surface changes slightly the following week, then, attack surface management looks to monitor those changes as and when they happen. So taking into account changes in the threat landscape, changes to attack surface and really trying to respond quickly to new 0 days and risks to the organization.
When we talk about attack surface management, I think it would be good to take a step back and say, what really is encompassed within an attack surface? What does that include?
Let me take that one first. So, if we think about an organization in a physical space, the perimeter fencing of an organization will be that attack surface. That's what a threat actor would look at first and try to penetrate first. In the digital world, what we consider to be attack surface is any systems that are externally facing. What that includes in practice is essentially three things: externally facing applications and systems that an organization is aware of, that have been by design created to be externally facing and represent the organization in the digital space. Second component of that is externally facing systems that hold data of the organization which the business is not aware of. And unfortunately, in the last few years, as many businesses have gone through the digital journey, we are seeing a lot more of what we call a shadow IT, externally facing components an organization is now aware of. So that's kind of a second component of an attack surface. And a third component of that, a very important one, is the supply chain, digital supply chain. So not the business itself, but your third parties who host your data or have access into your environment or are capable of causing business continuity impact should they get hacked. So essentially, those three things are your external attack surface, things that you are aware of and have to protect and defend, including those that you may not be you may not have visibility of.
Interesting. Okay. That does seem to make a lot of sense for us. Today, with organizations embracing technology really across their entire organization, using cloud-based services, remote working becoming more efficient, we see a lot more, at least in my opinion, it would be expansion of that attack surface. Does that align with your thinking as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to jump in on that one, we saw like a big shift in the last, I would say, 10 or so years in terms of what the traditional perimeter looked like. So as you mentioned, a lot of organizations will have migrated to the cloud. A lot of their systems may still be on premise, and perhaps they don't know that they're still there and still live. And it's really our job to try and find those areas of shadow IT, things that may have gone live without going through the proper processes as well. So that's another common sort of theme that we see. A developer or like a product team might need to hit deadlines, and so instead of going through the proper assurance processes and getting things pen tested, things might be live to their customers without going through that, and therefore might expose a number of vulnerabilities which we don't know exposed until we actually start looking. So yeah, they're sort of a common few things that we see in terms of the shift in the traditional perimeter, if you like.
Got it. Yeah, we touched on a couple of things there. I'd love to hear what either of you, what your take is on some of the challenges that organizations are facing today when it comes to managing their assets. Are they aware of their attack surface, things like that?
So from my perspective, in particular, working with organizations that have come out of incident scenarios, everyone is aware of how important it is to identify and defend your assets. However, the challenge is having the visibility of those assets are. So I think the core challenge is gaining visibility into the organizational systems that are externally facing, and identifying how vulnerable those systems are and putting those vulnerabilities into the context that is relevant to the organization, that is relevant to the sector where the business operates. It takes into consideration latest threat intelligence and how the likelihood is of exploiting those vulnerabilities. So I think everyone is very well aware. A lot of our clients are well aware of how important it is to defend your assets, but it's gaining the visibility of those assets that is a substantial challenge, especially for businesses that are geographically diverse, businesses that have gone through a rapid organic growth, businesses that have gone through mergers and acquisitions and have acquired other organizations operating different digital stack, businesses that have diverse supply chain, especially suppliers and third parties have access into the environment. So I think it's getting that first step right, getting the visibility and understanding of what is it that we're trying to protect and what is our attack surface looking like. That's for me the key challenge.
I think you hit on a good point there, which, coming from my background in enterprise security, I know it seems like some of these big Fortune 500 companies still are lacking visibility across their entire estate, which is a little scary to think about. But yeah, really, really difficult to defend against vulnerabilities if you don't have a visibility of what's even out there. So, kind of digging into that a little bit, what do you see as common threats to the organizations that we're seeing recently that would maybe be addressed through some attack surface management?
Yeah, so I guess one of the common things that we see is attacks against remote access gateways and remote access solutions. So I think this probably came shortly after everybody was in lockdown. Organizations needed to spin up remote access solutions really quickly, and therefore didn't really understand how to make them secure and make the connection to their internal network secure effectively. So as an organization, we've actually seen quite a shift in the types of initial access vector, shifting away from things like phishing and actually exploiting things like software vulnerabilities in remote access gateways and VPN endpoints and things like that. So just an example, at the beginning of the year, we had a couple of vulnerabilities in the FortiGate and a couple of FortiGate products. And again, that's a easy way for an attacker to gain access to an internal network. And quite often, remote access solutions or appliances won't be monitored because you can't install agents on those types of device. So again, they're not going to be detected if malicious activity is sort of taking place on those devices. So multiple reasons why an attacker would try and target those as opposed to going for things like phishing effectively, because the chance of exploitation is a lot higher.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe you could dig in a little bit for me then. How does this differ from a traditional, say, vulnerability scanning approach to this problem, let's say?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of different things here. So traditional vulnerability scanning approaches tend to focus on a set number of assets, say 100 IP addresses, and they don't tend to deviate from that scope unless somebody adds new assets manually. With ASM, we are carrying out continuous asset discovery. So we want to continuously identify what the attack surface looks like and make sure that we actually performing analysis on the entire attack surface instead of a reduced scope. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is around context. So with attack surface management, we take into account context of the organization itself, and we're able to prioritize the vulnerabilities based on the context. So, for example, if we are working with an organization in the financial sector, we know that, different attack vectors might be more relevant to that industry. And so we can prioritize the vulnerabilities based on what we know is actually being exploited in the wild for that particular sector. And we can also drill down to a per asset level as well if we know about, what systems we're dealing with and whether they are holding sensitive data and the risk to that as well.
That's really interesting. It sounds like it's a very dynamic process. Sorry, Catherine, please, if you've got something to add.
Yeah, just adding to that. As you said, vulnerability scanning is a traditional approach and it's still widely used and it's still a valid approach. But unfortunately, we've seen time and time again that the outcome of vulnerability scans, one, not only it's focused only on the system you're aware of, missing everything else. Two, it's quite often overwhelming to IT and security teams that are frequently, what we've seen from our clients, are resource constrained. So you get a very large, long vulnerability scanning report, which prioritizes the findings based on outside of the context of the business. So what that means in practice for resource constrained teams, it's one, lack of perhaps a lack of means to prioritize what is it that I need to address today, what is urgent for our organization in our threat context. Two, it is a lack of ability to centrally manage remediation of those vulnerabilities. Quite often, that report gets copied into an Excel spreadsheet or a project management system like Jira, spreading the tasks across a large number of people without having a centralized view of what is the priority and who is addressing each vulnerability that we identify as the highest risk for us today. So it's a number of weaknesses in that traditional approach that make it less efficient than something like attack surface management that looks outside of assets we're aware of and allows to prioritize them effectively using constrained resources that we know our clients operate.
Wow, really interesting. I think we unpacked a lot within those last few questions, so I'd like to kind of go back and touch on some of those. Number one, obviously, Katie's point that traditional vuln scanning is somewhat limited, it's constrained because it's only going off of set assets, whereas attack surface management is dynamically updating the assets so that you're getting a better sense of what actually is out there in terms of overall attack surface. But on top of that, I love to hear what you said there, Catherine, which is the context of the organization, right? I think traditionally we see vuln scan reports kind of rack and stack by CVSS scoring, as opposed to maybe where an actual vulnerability is more contextually threatening to an organization. So I love to think about that. Before we go any further, I know we talk about some potential case studies. So we want to go through any particular examples where we've seen an organization benefit from attack surface management, or maybe where they were vulnerable because they weren't doing something like that.
Yeah, I can perhaps jump in actually, seeing as we've been talking about expanding the scope and making sure we continuously try and identify what the attack surface looks like. So a recent organisation that we've worked with, they were basically doing monthly vulnerability scans, quite traditional in terms of their approach. Again, static list of scope, list of IP addresses, and they decided to migrate over to ASM as a bit more of a pragmatic approach. So the minute that we started, expanding that scope, trying to look for new assets belonging to that organisation, we found, I think we went from about 11 IP addresses to about 100. So we've already sort of increased their attack surface by, I don't know what percentage that works out at, but quite a significant increase. And actually, one of the assets that we found had a critical vulnerability that we wouldn't have picked up otherwise. So already, they're starting to see the benefits of doing this continuous asset discovery exercise and uncovering those areas of shadow IT, as Catherine mentioned.
Really interesting.
And I've got an example of perhaps a less traditional one of how attack surface management solution can be used to help an organization manage their attack surface more in a third-party risk space. Now, identifying and managing third-party risk is challenging. It's resource intensive, it's difficult, it's complex, it's expensive. So we've worked with an organization who has a large number of suppliers, 100 plus, without a means to effectively prioritize those suppliers. So, we haven't got the resources to address all 100 and risk assess all 100. Where do we start? And we've used ASM as a quick and broad brush way to risk prioritize suppliers who we've identified have a wide externally facing infrastructure with exploitable vulnerabilities by running a passive scan without direct interrogation of systems on those third parties. So using attack surface management tool more in the context of prioritizing risk stratifying suppliers of an organization so that the business has an idea of where to start or what can we class as our top priority suppliers.
Really interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing both of those examples. So just to kind of touch on some key points from those that we heard there, more of a traditional approach from Katie's example of a firm that did your traditional bone scanning, goes to attack surface management and sees almost 1,000% increase in what they believe their attack surface to be. But I like hearing the other example too, which is more of a proactive management of third party risk, where getting in and just being able to prioritize some of those third parties really becomes beneficial in terms of managing the cost and the overall risk of third party risk management. So I love to hear those two examples. As we dig in a little bit further here, what are some other common examples or some other common use cases where maybe attack surface management is going to provide some risk reduction or some overall visibility into an organization? Any other thoughts on that?
So I guess it can be quite useful. I think we have touched on it a little bit, but in terms of being able to rapidly respond to emerging threats. So again, I think Stephen, you said, you can't actually protect your assets if you don't know where they are and what you actually have in the first place. So if a new FortiGate vulnerability is released tomorrow, how are you going to be able to patch against that if you don't know where your FortiGate instances live? So yeah, it enables organizations to respond quite quickly in those cases where it's actually essential. I can't remember exactly the stat, but I think the time to exploit has gone down quite significantly in the last year. So we're seeing attackers actually exploit vulnerabilities within the first, I think it's something like 15 hours of the vulnerability getting released. So it doesn't give organizations a lot of time to be able to patch. And therefore, if they're trying to figure out where things are in the first place, that time is going to be a lot longer, and the likelihood of exploitation is going to be a lot higher as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great point. I know I put you on the spot there, asking for something kind of outside of what we had already discussed. So that's fantastic. I appreciate that example. As we're thinking through, time to exploit has dropped. Organizations maybe not being fully aware of what their attack surface is. Maybe you can list for me some high level things that organizations could be doing today to improve their exposure.
Okay, so I guess the first thing is being able to maintain visibility of what they have. So having a good inventory of assets, keeping that regularly up to date, doing discovery exercises if you have the ability to do so, to try and find those assets in the first place. That would be one key step. Understand your most critical areas as well. So understanding where your crown jewels live, where would you say the most critical assets live in your organization, in your environment, and making sure they're sort of prioritized for any patching, and if any vulnerabilities are discovered on those, make sure that those are focused on as a priority. And then, not necessarily relying on things like CVSS scoring to work through the vulnerability list, because we know that, although a CVSS rating gives an indication of the severity of an issue, it doesn't take into account things like threat intelligence, what's actually being exploited in the wild, and that real world threat actor activity, which we can obviously look to our incident response engagements to understand as well.
Yes, I think that's a really good feedback to kind of keep in mind throughout the course of this webinar. So thinking through those things again, really understanding their assets, those critical areas, and then again, having the context to really understand how certain vulnerability scores may be more applicable or less for an organization's risk. I think that's a great take there. Pulling back just, oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I actually, as we were talking through the use cases Katie has mentioned, I actually thought about another use case that we haven't addressed so far. It's niche, but it's becoming more and more prominent. We are frequently deploying ASM within the private equity space, allowing private equity firms who invest in various target organizations to have a portfolio-wide view of the risk exposure within each individual portfolio they invest in. Again, traditionally, some private equity firms used to use vulnerability scans, and those are one-off or perhaps a quarterly or biannual type of exercise. Whereas right now, using solution like ASM, we can give almost a live view for a topco, for the private equity firm, of how exposed to exploitable vulnerabilities each of their portfolio companies are. It, like I said, it's a niche use case, but in terms of assurance and comfort that provides to a firm, it gives a really quick and live view of the risk exposure, and therefore kind of what you can and cannot expect in terms of potential incidents happening across your portfolio.
I think there's a ton of value in that. Certainly, as we all know and work with PE quite often, they're always looking for ways to sort of generate efficiencies on these kinds of investigations. I think you nailed that one right on the head there, Catherine, is portfolio-wide risk assessment, understand, where their vulnerabilities are and really protect the value of those assets. So yeah, good touch there. Kind of taking a step back from that, sometimes we've heard ASM thrown around from some other organizations. We've seen it out in the wild. Why do you all think there are so many different types of tools called attack surface management, and how can we kind of sort through that as we look at those?
Yeah, there definitely is. And I think like having been doing ASM now for 4 or 5 years, I've kind of seen the industry.
You're the pro.
Well, I've seen the industry really take hold of that. And I think people are really understanding that vulnerability scanning as a traditional approach just wasn't working. There definitely is there are specific use cases where it does work well for organizations, but I think they do need a good team around tooling and, the right understanding of their organization to be able to make and get the most value out of those kind of tools. So yeah, in terms of ASM in the market today, there's definitely two camps. We've got the more SaaS product side of things, and we've got the more managed service side of things. So there's kind of two different approaches that kind of take into account the same methodology in that sense. But I think, yeah, organizations are really understanding that they need to take different approaches and consider different things in one kind of single approach as opposed to, different tools for different things, and being quite difficult to track.
Got it. I think that makes sense. So for the CISOs and CTOs who have joined our webinar here, they're probably looking at their budget line items and saying, great, this sounds like it's going to tell me everything about my vulnerabilities. Can I cancel my EDR contract? What do we say about, is this going to replace traditional EDR? What are your thoughts?
My answer would be no.
Perfect.
It's definitely designed to complement other solutions. EDR tends to focus on internal attack surface anyway. There are ASM solutions that focus on both external and internal attack surface, but it's very much a proactive approach, whereas EDR is more focused on detection as opposed to preventing future attacks and breaches.
Got it. Yeah. So let's not call and cancel those contracts just yet. Sounds like it's a tool that's going to augment, other existing tools within an infrastructure. But having said that, then, is there a concern that this creates more work for IT teams?
From my perspective, Steve, I actually think it creates less work, considering the aspect of ASM that we've covered earlier, the ability to more effectively prioritize the findings and contextualize the findings. It actually creates less work and a narrow view on highest priorities for the teams that will address those vulnerabilities. Second, it creates a single pane of glass. Single source of recommended actions around addressing those vulnerabilities. So I actually think it centralizes, it sharpens the thinking, it contextualizes the results, and therefore creates one central source of truth and source of actions to address top risk vulnerabilities and prioritize your actions. But you're right, it's yet another solution to look at. So yes, absolutely. And there needs to be a set of eyes who would look into the platform, look at the vulnerabilities, address them, manage them. So while it is somebody's responsibilities, I actually think using a solution like ASM makes those traditional set of responsibilities more effective.
Understood. Yeah, thank you. I think that gives some additional context on what teams should expect as they kind of get the results of these types of tooling and platform. Follow me down this path a little bit more, but what kind of technical integrations are required for attack surface management? Is this going to be something that's really challenging for teams to deploy? Talk me through that process a little bit.
So the beauty of attack surface management is that it's completely agentless. Our objective is to simulate a real world external attacker effectively. So real world attackers don't have agents installed, they don't have credentials, they don't have access to anything. So our view wants to replicate the attacker's view in that sense. So we don't need to deploy anything to get going. We could be completely blind if we like. We could start with very minimal information, say, for example, the organization's primary domain. And from that point, we're able to effectively map what their attack surface looks like with the least possible information. And so in that respect, it means that organizations, again, there's no burden on organizations for initial setup or, onboarding in that sense. We can literally get going at the click of a few buttons.
That's amazing for how much it seems like the intelligence derived from attack surface management is so valuable to an organization. It's interesting to hear that you could effectively launch it, like you said, with just the push of a couple buttons. That should be very comforting, I think, to those on the webinar now. So we've heard about what ASM can do in terms of presenting a view into some of these gaps in security. What happens next for an organization? What does it look like? Do they just then go through their typical kind of patch and vuln management procedures afterwards when they have the results? What does the kind of next steps typically look like for an organization?
So, excuse me, when we've identified issues, and we obviously try and do that on a continuous basis, it's down to us to give the right guidance to organizations as to how they patch. And one of the things that we wanted to be able to do with our solution that we're currently building is be able to present data in a simple format. So removing any sort of technical jargon, really easily highlighting the business risk and with context in mind as well, and giving organizations really easy steps to how they remediate these risks and where they need to prioritize as well.
Tremendous. Yeah, it sounds like this is a valuable initiative for an organization undertaken. Maybe should be a priority for many organizations, especially those that have an externally facing endpoints or infrastructure. Could you talk us through a little bit of, who are the right organizations for this? What's the right size? What's the right fit? Some of our listeners are probably coming from smaller organizations all the way up to large enterprise. So who's the right fit for attack surface management?
So we would consider anybody effectively. So anybody with an attack surface is effectively considered a target in the eyes of an attacker. Where things do get a little bit more complicated are where we work with organizations who are primarily hosting in the cloud. Typically, discovery of cloud assets can be quite difficult from an external perspective, and where shared hosting is concerned as well. So that makes things a little bit more difficult, and being able to provide the same level of benefits is a little bit more challenging as well. But we can look to things like where organizations have used their own subdomains and domains, and they will directly link back to the cloud infrastructure. So that gives us something to go on in terms of discovering new assets, and we can still make an assessment as to what the risk looks like on that asset as well.
Another aspect of that is organizations who do currently have their own vulnerability scans, so have gone down the traditional approach and perhaps have challenges in terms of managing the outcome of traditional vulnerability scans because they're extensive and are not contextualized. So this would be a very smooth transition into a solution that addresses the same targets but provides a single pane of glass and contextualized vulnerability scan results.
Yeah, and I love that you keep hitting on single pane of glass, Catherine, because I know coming from an organization that had a SOC and, we're managing traffic in every direction, I think, for the folks on the ground tactically, that's obviously a huge benefit, is being able to have that all condensed into one. So I'm glad to hear you touch on that. I'll shift gears briefly. We've got our first question in through the Q&A, and I think it hits on a couple of the key things that we've been talking about. So I'm going to ask that question now. I do also want to encourage the folks on the webinar, please get those questions in. We are getting toward the end here, so we'd love to address any of those kind of lingering thoughts or concerns you may have. So getting to our question, how does attack surface management integrate with other security tools? Katie or Catherine?
Shall I take this, Catherine?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I think we have seen a lot of organizations actually start to integrate, as in like vendors start to integrate all tools into one single pane of glass, as Catherine mentioned. And so, we want to be able to make things easy for organizations who are trying to manage their attack surfaces. So that can look like API integrations into the tooling that may have been used for vulnerability management, like Jira. And that can also look like, creating workflows off the back of what's produced in ASM tooling. So, being able to provide the capabilities to organizations to actually take what the output is from ASM and actually do something about it in terms of the remediation. So there's a few different things here, and I think with a shift to exposure management and having the full 360 view, we will see a big increase in vendors providing all tooling in one single pane of glass in the future, I think.
Tremendous. And with that said, Katie, do you think it would be worthwhile at this point to kind of go through some of the images of the dashboarding that we've created and talk folks through what that sort of looks like from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that we've been building out now for quite some time. I mentioned that one of the things that we're looking into is how we can kind of integrate AI here and sort of being able to make the summaries that we provide to our clients really easy to digest, and things where, technical jargon might be used, using AI to really sort of provide a summary of what that actually means from the client's perspective. Here in this dashboard, we've got sort of trends over time. We've got location of assets. We wanted to be able to provide a bit of a risk score in comparison to the organization's peers in their industry. And that's something that we're actually going to be pulling from our incident response data. So as SRM, we obviously deal with quite a high number of incidents, as Stephen mentioned at the beginning of the session. And it's a shame to not use the data that we collect during those incidents. So that's all going to be feeding back into the Polis attack surface management platform in different shapes and forms, one of which is a benchmark for risk score over time.
Tremendous. And I think I heard you mention some AI enhancement perhaps down the road. Could you talk us through a little bit more of what does that look like? What is there a roadmap to integrate some AI or large language model capabilities into this tool?
Yeah, definitely. It's on the roadmap. We're sort of experimenting with it at the minute. So with the descriptions and the summary that we showed previously. Also, we will probably look at how AI can help us with creating new scanners and detections, and sort of basing that off of what we're seeing in the wild as well. So we can probably look at things like techniques that we observe across our incidents and how we can use AI to generate new scanners based on those techniques. Obviously, with human eyes on those scanners before we start scanning our clients, we wouldn't want those to go through proper QA process and things like that. But it helps us to be able to come up with new techniques and stay ahead of the curve in that sense as well.
Staying ahead of the curve, every cybersecurity person's goal, obviously. That's tremendous, and I love these views you presented for us. Really clean dashboarding here. I think the viewers will really appreciate what we've put together from that. Shifting back to another question now. This one's a little more complicated, so hang with me here as we get into this one. We use mostly cloud apps. This is me quoting the question. We use mostly cloud apps and shared hosting. We have mobile device management, endpoint detection and response, XDR, and SOC in place. How would Polis attack surface management help us further? And then I've got a follow-on question from that, but I'll hold that for 1 second. So knowing they've got MDM, EDR, XDR, SOC in place, and I think I know where we're going to go with this, but how does Polis attack surface management provide additional value on top of that?
Should I take this one?
Go for it.
So first thing that comes to mind is that a lot of those solutions focus on the internal attack surface and again the detection capabilities. Whereas as we mentioned previously, ASM is more of a proactive approach. So we're effectively trying to prevent the breaches and the attacks happening in the first place. So ASM kind of sits as that outer layer, if you like, to stop the bad guys getting in the first place. Whereas your EDR, XDR, and things like that are designed to detect malicious activity after a breach has happened.
Catherine, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? I saw you nodding along.
It's absolutely that. So the solutions that are mentioned in the questions are those that are directed at systems we are aware of. What I think ASM allows us to identify is solutions that are externally facing, have our data, have access to into the environment, but we have perhaps not known them, are not aware of them. They're exposing us to the internet, and we are not able to capture those systems with the traditional EDR, etc. So it is that first and core capability of a solution like ISM in asset discovery, continuous, I should say, asset discovery, that complements the solutions you mentioned rather than replacing them.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Touches on what we talked about earlier as far as these tools really augmenting each other and providing you a defense in depth strategy. The follow-up question to this one, and feel free to let us know if this is applicable or not, but coming off of the back of that, how does Polis ASM help us further? Also, how can we reduce the risk in RDP solutions? And this may not be something that's addressed specifically by ASM, but if you've got a perspective on it, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so first things that come to mind are obviously making sure you patch super quick and keeping an eye on new threats and being having a good understanding of when vulnerabilities affect your remote desktop solutions. And then secondly, things like MFA really help here as well. So we still quite often see clients and organizations that don't have MFA on things like VPN solutions, and that really increases the risk. So for example, where an attacker might use brute force or password spraying attacks, things like that, the risk of them actually getting in is a lot higher if you don't have MFA in place, multi-factor authentication. So those would be my sort of two key recommendations there.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Catherine, did you have anything to add on that one, or are you?
No, Katie captured
Yeah, I think
captured it correctly. Patch.
That's right. That's right. And well, so maybe one of the things that ASM can provide from that perspective is just an awareness on where patching or vulnerabilities, patching lacks or vulnerabilities exist. So appreciate that as well. Okay. Kind of in the same vein as that, if you were, you're a
If we,
CTO, CISO, you've got a budget and you're going to prioritize certain tooling. Where do you feel ASM fits in this with an annual budget? Is this something that organizations should be doing annually, quarterly? What's the frequency of that? And where would you prioritize ASM among some of these other security initiatives?
if we, so from my perspective, um, in a nutshell, it's pretty up there. Again, one of the core benefits of a solution like ISM is allowing to continuously identify your external attack perimeter and identify holes, gaps, vulnerabilities in that external attack perimeter, putting into context of the likelihood of how exploitable those vulnerabilities are. So, so while it is important to direct some of your resources and finances on securing assets you know are aware of and operate, it is important to put some resources towards continuously identifying those assets that you may not be aware of. So for me, that is probably a core criteria that puts a solution like ISM on the priority list for budgeting. If we
I think so. Katie, anything to add along those same lines?
No, I think, yeah, I would pretty much agree with what Catherine said there.
I think one of the values is really understanding if there's parts of your estate that you were unaware of before, right? And so if you're making critical changes within the infrastructure, you're adding new tooling, new users, things like that. I think, attack surface management becomes something more valuable more frequently if you're making those changes, or you've done some sort of risk assessment or something like that where maybe you will be making changes. So appreciate that perspective as well. We've had another question come in. This one's a little bit more technically oriented. Mindful some APIs might only provide access to certain types of data or specific endpoints. Are there any limitations on information which can be retrieved from a single API?
This is a good question. I'm not really entirely sure on the context behind this, so keen to understand specifically uh,
Yeah,
where this one's come from. I guess, access to APIs is limited by whether API keys is needed. And in that sense, ASM will not have access to API keys if they're thinking from, retrieving data from an attacker's perspective. That is, not sure if they were referring to API integrations or not. So, yeah, hopefully that helps in that question.
yeah, I appreciate you taking a stab at it nonetheless. And if that was an anonymous question, so if the submitter has some additional points of clarity they'd like, we'd encourage you to submit a follow-up anonymously as well if you'd like. Um, okay, so we've kind of covered some of the core basics here.
if we
I did want to, before we kind of close out the webinar or hit any final topics here, I did want to mention, Jill Farron, our technical director, sadly was unable to attend this webinar. She is out sick. But I did want to thank you, Catherine, for jumping in and attending with us and filling in. It's been really wonderful. So,
like to be in.
just to reiterate for the folks on the webinar still, Jill, Catherine, Katie, myself, we're all here to help you out with any of these questions or concerns down the road as you engage us on attack surface management. You can find us all on the SRM website, which is at www.s-rminform.com. So I'll take one more look at the questions here, and it looks like we don't have anything that came in on Q&A. So at this time, Catherine and Katie, I'd love if you could give us some key, maybe 2 or 3 key takeaways for the folks on the webinar regarding attack surface management and applicability within their organizations.
Sure.
Let's
So,
start with you, Catherine.
so for me, yeah, exactly. So, um, managing and protecting critical assets is one of the core pillars of organization security. Understanding what those assets are and continuously exploring new assets that you may not be aware of, and continuously identifying vulnerabilities in those that you are aware of is a critical component in securing your defenses. So, asset management, identifying vulnerable assets, prioritizing them by those that are critical to the organization, and addressing them as a priority is a substantial step towards securing your estate from attackers who don't care who you are, don't care where you are, will go after the assets that they can see exploitable and can monetize upon. So for me, attack surface management solution is one of the critical components of securing your estate. So yeah, that's probably kind of my summary of what
That's
this
a big one. That's a big one. I appreciate that. Yeah. Katie, some key takeaways from you?
I guess to keep it very short, you can't protect what you don't know exists. That would be my key.
I mean, being concise there, I think gets the message home, right? I mean, how do you defend it if you don't know it exists? Absolutely. I'll add 2 key points here. I think applicability to attack surface management downstream was something I hadn't really considered. So I loved hearing that from you, Catherine, whether that's using attack surface management to help prioritize third-party risk, or from the perspective of private equity, getting a view of vulnerability of security programs across your portfolio. I think both of those are really interesting ways to utilize that tool and provide additional value there. So really appreciate you all sharing that with me. We'll do one last look here. No other questions. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and close out the webinar just a few minutes early so that everybody can have some time back. Actually, you know what? Let's do one final poll here from Charlotte. Charlotte, could you throw the poll up here before our folks sign off for the day? Do you feel that your knowledge of attack surface management has improved? And of course, we've been asking for questions throughout this. If you are one of the respondents who says my knowledge of attack surface management solutions has improved, but I still have questions, there is time to submit your question. We are still accepting those. And of course, if you feel uncomfortable submitting a question here in the chat, you're always welcome to reach out to any of the members here by email or phone or whatever your preferred method of communication is. It looks like we have about 50-50 there. 50-50 on 12 respondents, and no additional questions have come in. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciated the opportunity to speak with you about attack surface management. On behalf of Catherine, Katie, and the SRM team, thank you for joining.